Above our canopy of treetops, a cold geometric form 400 meters long hovered in stillness. Its mechanical tendrils, in just 4 seconds, reduced a 60-ton main battle tank, complete with depleted uranium armor, to a fine gray-white dust of molecularly mixed powder. Every radio frequency was hijacked with hostility, looping fragmented voice recordings of fallen crew members played in reverse. Through the periscope's crosshairs, locked at 15 meters, Private Miller had frozen in a standard tactical kneeling position for 7 minutes. His combat uniform, Kevlar helmet, and exposed facial skin all bore the same ashen hue, like bone ash washed in hydrofluoric acid. The frost on his rifle's handguard was black. His eyes hadn't melted. They merely desiccated, collapsing into 2 shriveled olive pits, their gaze still pinned to the flank alert direction. On the thermal imaging channel, his body temperature read 0. No one spoke on the channel. The commanders of 4 Abrams tanks simultaneously saw their own Miller, at 11 o'clock from the 3rd vehicle directly ahead of the 1st and on the flank of the 4th. The same soldier, the same posture, distributed across the 4 quadrants of the platoon's defensive perimeter. The 4th vehicle's commander began reporting coordinates, his voice as if sounded raw. Then a tendril descended from the thick fog above. It passed through the mist without disturbing a single vapor particle, its tip swelling into a crystal cluster the size of a fist. Each facet refracted a cold blue fluorescence in the absence of light. The tendril precisely touched the back of Miller's neck. The moment the crystal cluster made contact, Miller's neck structure collapsed inward. The gray-white matter spread from the contact point in concentric circles. Skin, muscle, cervical vertebrae, each layer losing density. The entire process was silent. No fluid seeped out. 2 seconds later, Miller, along with his gear, weapon, and the knees touching the ground, shattered from top to bottom into a fine white powder. A strange ground wind, the instant the tendril retracted, swept it up, spiraling it into the invisible depths of the sky. For screams erupted simultaneously over the radio. The 4th vehicle began reversing. The 3rd vehicle's turret, driven by hydraulics, swung wildly to the right. A second tendril dropped vertically from directly above the 1st vehicle. 12 hours earlier, we'd have called this an armed reconnaissance mission for exercise Return to Germany. For M1 Abrams, fitted with the latest batch of thermal imaging modules, were ordered to establish a forward observation post at the Fulda Gap. The intelligence briefing was restrained. A Soviet Guards tank division might use this unprecedented fog for a feint. The fog formed suddenly. At 2:17 hours, the humidity data on the weather report jumped to a physically impossible value. Then the sensors failed. All electronic devices pulsed with unstable noise, and on the baseband of the communications frequencies, a suppressed near-infrasound pulse could be heard, repeating every 7 seconds, like some massive object taking a breath from an immense distance. 3 hours into the mission, thermal imaging began capturing signals that defied classification. They weren't ground targets. A cold outline appeared above the tree canopy, moving laterally. The estimated size reading flickered on the screen 3 times, each result exceeding the range module's upper limit. Its thermal signature wasn't engine waste heat or human radiation. It was a sharply bounded cold zone, uniform in temperature, like a precisely cut patch of night sky pasted behind the fog layer. Then the vehicle's acoustic sensors picked up a sound source. All radios received it simultaneously, direction finding failing because the sound came from every direction. Voice print analysis classified it as low-frequency mechanical vibration, but the spectrum showed no known vehicle characteristic peaks. It was the sound of gears meshing, huge, slow, rhythmic, each mesh coinciding with a peak in the infrasound pulse. I ordered the entire platoon to shut down engines, relying solely on battery power, full vehicle silence. The sound drew closer. Transient peaks recorded by the sensors showed that with each movement of the source object, a set of secondary vibrations induced in the soil, like microseisms, but narrow and sharp in waveform. On the anticipated Soviet attack axis, that forest was enduring a sustained low-frequency stress. The driver stared at the thermal screen, his finger hovering over the engine start button. The external temperature gauge showed the fog's temperature had dropped uniformly by 1.3 degrees Celsius in 10 minutes, then stabilized. Humidity remained saturated. The radiation alarm needle wavered from the edge of the green zone into the yellow. Silence was broken by the fourth vehicle. Its commander, Connolly, 6 years of service, 3 live-fire deployments, never a stress marker on his psychological evaluation. His voice exploded through the headset as the turret, driven by hydraulics, had already completed a 60-degree left turn. He didn't request fire authorization. He shouted into the common channel. Playback could only discern, "Catch this," and fired the main gun. The M830A1 multi-purpose round exited the gun tube at a muzzle velocity of 1,400 meters per second. Muzzle flash tore a 30-meter diameter instantaneous cavity through the thick fog, the shockwave shoving the wall of mist outward into a rapidly expanding white torus. Inside the cavity, visibility surged to 200 meters. The object was directly above the cavity. Every periscope locked onto it simultaneously. The target stood approximately 45 meters tall, bearing 11 degrees west of due north. Its bulk exceeded the combined length of the 4 tanks in the platoon, nose to tail. Its hull was composed of hexagonal panels, each hexagon's diagonal spanning longer than a jeep. The seams glistened with a slick, organic sheen under the muzzle flash. The underside wasn't flat. It was a convex spindle arc, covered in a dense, slowly writhing mass of structures. Mechanical limbs with reverse joints, hydraulic pistons over 2 meters in diameter, whip-like tendrils tipped with crystal clusters. The grotesque, twisted mechanical limbs clustered on its belly, the tendrils at their ends creeping slowly, like a grotesque swarm of insects spawned beneath an inverted warship. The salvo struck, before the kinetic energy of the armor-piercing projectile could fully release. The high explosive charge blossomed into an orange-red fireball on the shell's surface. The shockwave rippled across the hexagonal plating in a visible wave, spreading from the impact point, traversing 3 hex cells before fading. No fragmentascen penetrascen. No structurel deformation. After the hot gases dissipated, not even a scratch remained on the shell. Connolly barked a second command over the channel. Voice analysis showed his vocal cords were nearing the tearing threshold. The speech recognition module captured only fragments, reload, then the transmission cut off. 3 tendrils stabbed down through the fog simultaneously. Their extension speed exceeded the tracking limit of the human eye. The gunner of Vehicle 1 later stated in his report that he only saw 3 afterimages. If high-speed footage existed, it would show no discernible acceleration phase between the tendrils' retracted state and full extension. The crystal clusters at their tips emitted the same blue-violet glow along their trajectory. Vehicle 4's external microphone recorded a high-frequency spike, like glass shattering at resonant pitch 0. 3 seconds before the strikes, the first tendril struck the turret roof's left side, 12 centimeters behind the commander's hatch. The moment the crystal cluster contacted the homogeneous armor steel, the metal's crystalline lattice began a phase transition at the point of impact. The silver-gray rolled steel turned pale white, then translucent, finally taking on a matte texture resembling sintered ceramic. This transformation spread radially at 3 meters per second. The periscope protective covers, antenna mounts, and crosswind sensors on the turret all underwent the same material conversion within fractions of a second. The second tendril pierced the upper front hull armor, the impact point precisely between the driver's viewport and the lower hull weld line. The same phase transition radiated outward, merging with the turret's transform zone at the turret ring. The third tendril punched straight through the engine compartment. The gas turbine's blades shattered the same second the material conversion completed. All 3 contacts occurred within 1.4 seconds of the high explosive detonation. Once the phase transition finished, Vehicle 4, once a main battle tank, became a gray-white geometric form stripped of all metallic luster. Its outline remained. The gun tube still aimed in its previous direction, the tracks still biting the ground, the road wheels still bearing the full weight. But every structure lost cohesion simultaneously. Pre-stress released entirely. The gun tube snapped at the muzzle brake. The turret collapsed along the ring, like a person's skeleton being pulled out during an agonizingly slow squat. The hull folded inward along the upper front armor and chassis weld line. The torsion bars of the road wheels snapped 12 times in succession, each brake like a dry vertebra cracking. The entire vehicle disintegrated into a uniform mound of debris within 5 seconds. 60 tons of Abrams tank, depleted uranium armor, gas turbine, 120mm smoothbore, 40 stored rounds, and 1,200 coaxial machine gun rounds, all converted into the same substance, gray-white powder. Later lab analysis showed particle sizes between 0.3 and 0.5 millimeters, with organic and inorganic matter shattered to molecular level uniform mixing. Pile of sand, approximately 1.5 meters high, 6 meters in diameter at the base. The surface was perfectly smooth, forming a flawless natural angle of repose, without any irregular protrusions or depressions. At that moment, the vehicle's onboard radiation alarm swung from the yellow zone violently into the red, the needle hitting the range limit stop with a mechanical hum. Connolly didn't respond to the call. All 4 channels of Vehicle 4 were nothing but noise. I switched to intra-platoon comms and ordered Vehicles 3 and 1 to close on my position. The gunner called out a bearing, his voice flat as if reading from a training manual, but his cadence was nearly 3 times slower than normal. Then the dense fog sealed itself shut again. The cavity torn open by the artillery barrage lasted less than 8 seconds. The mist surged back from every direction, first swallowing the edges, then drowning the center, like some sentient fluid mending a breach. The site where Vehicle 4's wreckage lay was consumed anew. The gray-white sand heap vanished from our sight, and its infrared signature dropped below ambient background temperature within 3 seconds. That enormous object did not continue moving. Thermal imaging showed it retracting all its appendages, hovering directly above the point where Vehicle 4 had disintegrated. Its cold signature stabilized at the center of the screen, its outline now sharper than before, as if the shelling hadn't harmed it but had succeeded in awakening it. Those folded mechanical limbs now all pointed toward the ground, their terminal crystal clusters displaying an extremely faint negative temperature signature on the thermal readout, radiating some unmeasurable energy downward. The low-frequency vibrations ceased abruptly. The grinding of gears vanished. The infrasonic pulses disappeared entirely from the spectrum, replaced by something far more menacing. Absolute silence, devoid of any background noise. With the external microphones at maximum gain, even the sound of wind rustling through treetops was undetectable. That silence lasted 47 seconds. Then all radios activated spontaneously at the same instant. For channels, all seized simultaneously by the same signal. Not voice, a rhythmic, repeating low-frequency pulse, its tempo perfectly synchronized with the infrasonic oscillations recorded earlier. The comms operator's panel showed received power high enough to fry the preamplifier, yet the automatic protection circuit didn't trip. It was frequency hopping according to our internal communication protocol, every hop point prelocked. Our radios were actively establishing a handshake with it. The handshake terminated on its own after 3 minutes, not cut off by us. The received power curve on the comms panel plunged from its peak straight down below the noise floor, and all 4 bands simultaneously reverted to thermal noise. The low-noise amplifier's self-protection circuit re-engaged. No human intervention throughout the entire process. The comms operator stared at the spectral waterfall display, his finger hovering over the power-off button, finding nothing to act on. Then the object retracted all its exposed appendages. On the thermal image, its mechanical limbs folded one by one in a fixed sequence, stowing into recessed grooves beneath its belly. Each limb emitted a distinct low-frequency vibration during folding, recorded by the vehicle's microphones as a pulse train spaced one, 7 seconds apart. Once retracted, its underside became a single smooth arc. Those tentacles that had pierced an Abrams 6 hours earlier had all disappeared into an internal space we couldn't see. It went still, hovering 45 meters above the ground, method of levitation unknown. Chassis load-unload signals zeroed out. Ground microseismic sensors registered nothing. It neither descended nor departed. The cold contour on the thermal display was as stable as an iceberg frozen in midair. The gunner of Vehicle 1 was the first to speak. He said 2 words. It stopped. Spectral analysis showed his vocal cord amplitude at only 1/5 of normal levels. I started timing. Vehicle 1's digital clock read 1342. The external microphones picked up only our own breathing. Everyone's respiration rate had doubled compared to before the silence. For the first 15 minutes, no one believed the stillness would last. The gunner kept his eyes on the thermal screen, fingers resting on the turret traverse wheel. The loader cradled a single armor-piercing round, never feeding it into the breech. At the 30-minute mark, the commander of Vehicle 3 lowered his voice and said through the intercom, "It's waiting for us to move." That sentence was recorded by the vehicle's internal microphones. I didn't correct him. He was right, but only half right. We killed the engine, shut down all active emission sources. Thermal radiation decayed from our hull at a measurable rate. Outside air temperature continued to drop. By the 40th minute, the armor's surface temperature had fallen below ambient. In its perception domain, we transformed from hot, pulsing objects that actively belched high-temperature exhaust into 3 slowly cooling metal shells blending into the environmental background. It wasn't waiting for us to move. It had filed us away. That was the conclusion we reached only afterward. It let us go. As long as we grew cold like the dead, to it we were just stones. At the 70th minute, I ordered a systematic recording of the target's external characteristics. The gunner's thermal imaging screenshots filled 3 memory cards. The periscope crosshairs repeatedly measured its long-axis dimensions, fluctuating between 390 and 420 meters. Visibility in the fog was unstable, preventing an exact value. The arrangement of its hexagonal shell segments was hand-drawn across several pages of the tactical log. Near the impact zone, 3 hexagonal units bore clear carbonized residue from grenade blasts, but the carbon layer was thinning at an imperceptible rate. This was only confirmed later by comparing screenshots from different timeframes. The vehicle's radiation alarm needle began a slow drift at the 75th minute. No sudden jumps, a continuous glide. From the upper limit of the red zone, it slid bit by bit toward the far end of the scale. The dose rate was rising. The fog itself possessed extremely low radioactive activity. This conclusion was enough to explain the shift in the external environment. At the 113th minute, the driver of Vehicle 3 asked a single question. "Is it breathing?" No one answered, but we all heard it. The infrasound pulses, dormant for nearly 2 hours, re-emerged. Their frequency halved, their amplitude reduced to a quarter of before. It no longer sounded like gears meshing. It was eerily akin to some colossal creature ventilating in its sleep. The digital clock clicked over to 180 minutes. The second hand kept moving. Time was still passing, but we could no longer confirm if its pace matched what it had been when we entered. The false comm ended at 3 hours and 11 minutes. Whitaker, the loader of Vehicle 2's crew, 19 years old, with a spotless service record. At 3 hours and 9 minutes, limb tremors began. The vehicle's intercom recorded his accelerating breathing rhythm. At 3 hours and 10 minutes, he started coughing, not a reflexive action, but forced exhalation from simultaneous loss of control over his vocal cords and diaphragm. At 3 hours and 11 minutes, he rose from his seat. His Kevlar helmet struck the turret roof, producing a dull metallic echo. Then came violent convulsions, and from his throat, a series of high-pitched, throat-strained gasps. The intercom system transmitted these sounds intact into the platoon's communication loop. We all heard Whitaker's gradual loss of control at the same moment. His breathing spiked from 22 to 45 cycles per minute, and voice sprint analysis showed audio components concentrating in the high-frequency range above 2000 Hz. This band exactly matched the scanning frequency the object had used to lock onto us via radio after Vehicle 4 was destroyed. On thermal imaging, the low-temperature silhouette that had hung 300 meters above us for the past minutes shifted at the same instant as Whitaker's third cough. First, infrasound pulses reappeared on the spectrum, frequency jumping from 0, 3 Hz to 1, 7 Hz, amplitude increasing by 16 decibels. Next, the curved armor panels on its belly began to split from the center. 6 hydraulic pistons simultaneously pushed the shell segments aside, revealing the previously retracted appendage storage structure. Those mechanical limbs didn't extend sequentially. They shot out all at once, all pointing downward, their terminal crystal clusters glowing blue-purple in the fog. An external microphone recorded a new sound source, a metallic grinding akin to a hydraulic propulsion system under heavy load. The sound was plural, at least 20 independent mechanical joints moving in sync. Whitaker kept coughing. The commander of Vehicle 2, in a whisper barely audible over the intercom, reported that he had covered Whitaker's mouth, but the spasms were uncontrollable. The loader's body convulsed violently in his seat, his combat boots repeatedly kicking the floor plate, each impact faithfully transmitted by the microphone to the other two crews. The object moved, not laterally, descending. Its overall height dropped 15 meters in 2 seconds, the lower half-arc sinking below the canopy line. Rangefinder readings jumped from 45 meters to 30 meters, then continued downward. Compressed fog jetted outward from around its shell in a ring, forming visible turbulent vortex rings. The tree canopy didn't snap or crack under its approach. Only later, reviewing the vehicle footage frame by frame, did I see it. The needle layer disintegrated before contacting the shell surface, reduced to invisible aerosol dispersed by the vortex. At 3 hours and 12 minutes, Vehicle 2 was targeted. The method was identical to Vehicle 4. 3 tentacles shot simultaneously from different points on its belly, angles precisely calculated. The first struck 25 centimeters ahead of the turret ring, the second pierced the upper front armor, and the third drove vertically into the engine intake grille at the rear. The interval between hits was 0. For seconds, the external contours of Vehicle 2 completed their material transformation within a second of impact. A grayish-white hue spread outward simultaneously from the 3 hit points, enveloping the dense weld seams and sloped armor, then bridging the gap around the turret ring, fusing the turret and hull into a single seamless mass. The disintegration was faster than that of Vehicle 4. From penetration to total collapse, it took only 4 seconds. The stress waves generated as the gun barrel snapped were picked up by the audio sensors as a series of sharp, tinny clangs, like a glockenspiel being shattered. When the last sound faded, a mound of grayish-white sand occupied the parking spot of Vehicle 2, identical in volume to the remains of Vehicle 4. Then, Vehicle 2's radio transmitter automatically activated. It began broadcasting. Our receiver panels displayed the signal format as a standard platoon tactical data link request, with a transmission power of 0. 5 watts, correct frequency, and proper encryption. The caller's identity code flashed on the screen, displaying the identity sequence of Vehicle 4's Connolly, then the sequence of the railroad operator, then the driver's. These 3 codes had vanished with the vehicle 6 hours ago. Now they appeared together on Vehicle 2's channel. The encryption was fully intact, and the timestamps in the handshake data packets were 4. 5 hours ago, 2. 3 hours ago, and the current real time. All 3 time layers were spliced into a single data frame with the checksums correct. The radio operator glanced in my direction, his Adam's apple bobbing once. He didn't speak, only turning the display toward me. In the bottom right corner, the real-time decoded text streamed line by line. Vehicle 4's final status report, Vehicle 2's remaining ammunition inventory, and the internal communication backup from Vehicle 1 sent 40 minutes ago, all re-encoded and repeatedly broadcast as a public message. The last line of text didn't belong to any of our vehicles, only 6 letters. Breathe. In the next second, the onboard clock began to malfunction. Not the digital display. The mechanical, analog clock's second hand stopped at the 12 o'clock position, then started moving counterclockwise at a steady pace, completing each revolution in 5 seconds. The digital clock's readout jumped back from 1653 to 1612, then to 1402, and finally to 11 o'clock, each jump averaging 2 hours, precisely the time interval between the start of our mission and each subsequent attack. All timing devices went haywire. On the central control panel of Vehicle 1, the mission timer and weapon status update times began to run in opposite directions. The mechanical watches we wore on our wrists also reversed, the second hands moving in perfect sync with the onboard clock, ticking backward at the same rate. In the 7th minute after the temporal collapse, Vehicle 3's driver, Rojas, unstrapped his safety harness. He was from Lubbock, Texas, had been enlisted for 11 months, and his training records never flagged any psychological abnormalities. Amid the continuous hum of the turret's turning motor, he stood up, his Kevlar helmet bumping against the hatch lining, and then he laughed. a composite frequency, rhythmically even, almost a chanting laugh. The external microphones matched this sound to the most similar vocal stress pattern in the database, which came from an intensive care unit in a psychiatric hospital. Over the internal communication system, he spoke in a completely steady tone. "They're playing it backward. Every death is recorded, did you hear? We're listening to the tape playing backward. When it reaches the end, it will start again." He pushed the hatch open. The outside temperature was -4 degrees Celsius. The humidity was saturated, and visible gray particles spiraled slowly downward in the air, defying Brownian motion. Rojas climbed over the side of the turret, stepped onto the front armor, and walked down the sloping glassy plate to the ground. He was unarmed, helmetless, and his cold weather gloves were flung off 3 seconds after he stood up, landing beside the tank's road wheels. He walked into the thick fog at a normal pace. The thermal imaging tracked his final 47 seconds of life, a gradually fading infrared heat source that transitioned from standing to kneeling about 90 meters from Vehicle 3, then vanished completely. No one pursued. No one reached out. The basic physiological reactions of the crew, sudden increases in cardiac output, fingers moving toward weapons, throat muscles contracting to prepare for speech, were all overridden by a deeper neural inhibition. The commander of Vehicle 3 later repeated the same phrase in his statement. "My body wouldn't respond." 1 minute and 40 seconds after Rojas vanished, Freeman, the survivor from Vehicle 2, began to repeatedly tap his knuckles against the inner armor. The rhythm was consistent: 3 quick taps, 2 slow ones, a pause, then repeat. This rhythm matched no known military hand signal or recognition code. The communications specialist manually intercepted a segment of the tapping, input it into the audio database for search. The result was a sequence of Morse code letters that spelled out a single sentence. "It won't let you out." The communications specialist shut off the primary channel of the internal communication system and switched to a backup. His voice was crystal clear. "Sir, it's the same thing on all frequencies." He projected the waterfall spectrum of the intercepted signals onto the main display. The full band scan results cascaded down the screen. From high frequency to extremely low frequency, every band was being modulated. The waveform of the modulated signal repeated every 4 seconds, with the modulation depth increasing over time. He switched to the audio demodulation output, and the vehicle speakers emitted a sequence of sounds. The last coughs from Whitaker in Vehicle 2, the footsteps of Rojas crossing the armor, and Connolly's cry of "reload" from Vehicle 4. These 3 disjointed audio fragments were seamlessly stitched together into a new sentence, playing on a loop with perfect clarity and 0 background noise. The communications specialist withdrew his fingers from the touchpad, his face expressionless. "They're part of it now." The commander of Vehicle 3 initiated a vote on the internal channel. His voice was flat, maintaining a steady pitch, as if he were reporting routine equipment status. The vote proposal read, "Shut down all remaining systems, including life support. Reason: thermal imaging confirms full band tracking of heat sources. By shutting down active cooling and simultaneously releasing all oxygen, the internal temperature of the vehicle will equalize with the environment in 8 minutes. We will no longer be detected." The voting process only made it halfway. The first crew member to provide a secondary confirmation paused for 2 seconds after pressing the transmit button. Then a voice that belonged to no one present erupted from the same channel: Rojas's laughter. The encoding was flawless, the encrypted link fully intact, and the protocol header indicated the transmission source was a backup radio that had been destroyed 30 minutes ago. The laughter played 3 times in succession before stopping. The channel remained silent for 0.8 seconds. Then came a dull thud. The commander of Vehicle 3 had swung his right forearm into the cockpit partition with such force that it caused a wrist sprain. He terminated the voting procedure. He didn't say, "Maintain your battle stations," or "Hold your ground." His exact words were, "No one shuts down. It makes no difference who does." I observed the external environment through the periscope of Vehicle 1. The fog had darkened from a grayish-white to a deep, almost anoxic venous blood hue over the past 6 minutes. Radiation readings continued to climb, and the vehicle's radiation alarm had already exceeded its upper limit, the needle trembling against the stop. The type of radiation was unidentifiable. No gamma or neutron labels, just a new error code. In that moment, the driver spoke again. His name was Bennett, sitting 2 meters to my right. He had not participated in the vote or any communication, his eyes fixed on the thermal imaging screen. Next he spoke, his voice low, as if reporting an insignificant reading discrepancy. It's reconfiguring the terrain beneath us. It's dissolving the terrain beneath us. The thermal imaging switched to a subterranean view. 3 meters below the soil, a uniform horizontal layer of low-density material was forming, growing at a steady rate with clear boundaries. The layer was losing structural integrity. Tree roots, gravel, and frozen soil were all being broken down into a highly fluid suspension of fine particles. Our tank was parked on a foundation that was liquefying. At the current rate of sinking, the tank would be completely submerged in 40 minutes. The digital clock reset. It read 0. Then it began to count up, ticking at the correct speed. I turned to the central control panel. Only 2 vehicles and 7 people remained in the platoon. The intense reaction from Vehicle 3 had caused its thermal signature to reappear on the tracking interface, while the sand pile at the location of Vehicle 2's wreckage still emitted a faint, cold glow against the atmospheric background. The object had retracted its tentacles, its appendages now hanging in a semi-folded state beneath the chassis, but it had not returned to a dormant mode. It was waiting for the next variable that would trigger the harvest. We would all be that variable. The only difference was the order of triggering. I glanced at the collective protection system switch in the upper right corner of the panel. One of the design specifications of the Abrams tank is to seal the crew compartment completely in a nuclear, biological, and chemical environment, establishing positive pressure and filtering all external aerosols, while maintaining combat readiness in a sealed state. This tank is equipped with full-band electronic jamming capabilities, originally intended to disable enemy communications and data links. The interference module's design power can block all RF windows within 200 meters, 7 living men, a sealed iron hull, and a transmitter capable of screaming across all frequencies. I reached out and pressed the pre-start button for the collective protection system. The cabin pressure increased by 3 kilopascals from ambient in half a second, the sound of the sealing valves locking shut reverberating through the armored ribs to the turret's rear compartment. Then I dialed the full-spectrum jamming module to maximum power, my finger hovering over the main launch button. I said, "Engines at full speed. All ammunition loaded, safeties off." Bennett turned around. He was only 20. He glanced at me, then placed his hand on the throttle lever. 2 gas turbines ignited simultaneously. The AGT 1500 startup signature was a steep spike, soaring from the infrasonic baseline to 110 decibels. The turbine blades accelerated to 67% of their rated speed within 3 seconds, exhaust gases shooting out of the rear nozzle at 500 degrees Celsius. On the thermal imaging screen, our 2 vehicles instantly transformed into 2 blazing white spots. Vehicle 3 was also accelerating. Its engine had started 0. 7 seconds later than ours, but the speed curve matched perfectly. We were operating the same power pack according to the same training manual, and now the roar of these 2 machines overlapped so thoroughly that they were indistinguishable in the spectrum. The full-spectrum jamming activated in the same second the engines reached full speed. The N/VLQ-6 jamming module was designed to cover a 2-kilometer range, with preset targets including Soviet radio proximity fuses and battlefield communication networks. I set it to maximum transmission power, pushed the frequency hopping rate to the hardware limit, and simultaneously emitted blocking noise across all bands. The electromagnetic environment outside the tank jumped from a low-noise background to a fully saturated interference field in an instant. The spectrum waterfall on the communication panel turned entirely white, from extremely low frequencies to extremely high frequencies. None were spared. This tank was now a sealed iron box screaming continuously to all electromagnetic sensors. The object's reaction was faster than human nerve conduction. 0.3 of a second after the jamming activated, its cold outline on the thermal imaging screen flickered with a bright spot that covered its entire surface. Its shell temperature, previously stable at 4 degrees below ambient, spiked by 11 degrees in an instant, then returned to the baseline. The pulse lasted only a single frame on the thermal imaging. Then the mist began to spin. The external camera footage showed that the dark gray aerosol particles, which had been in a uniform, slow descent, suddenly halted. Each visible particle suspended in place, then began to rotate counterclockwise, accelerating rapidly. The center of rotation was directly above the geometric midpoint of the line connecting our two vehicles and the object. The spiral arms formed within 3 seconds. A vortex column over 80 meters in diameter rose from the ground to the tree canopy, carrying with it fragmented vegetation and our exhaust gases, forming a swirling gray wall around us. The air pressure was dropping. The pressure gauge for the collective protection system slowly slid from positive to negative, the seals enduring a continuous external suction. I ordered the shutdown of all external lights and auxiliary sensors. The vehicle's power supply was now concentrated on the jamming module and the main gun stabilization system. The only light inside the tank came from the indicator lights and the thermal imaging screen. For seconds after the vortex wall closed, the object began to descend below the tree canopy. It no longer retracted its appendages. All its mechanical limbs were fully extended, hanging downward from the chassis, their reverse-jointed metal bones crossing over treetops and shrub layers, the tips oscillating at high frequency in the air with small amplitudes, as if searching for an extremely precise signal source. Its lower end was now less than 25 meters from the ground, its outline dominating the center of our periscope's upper field of view. The seams on the hexagonal shell were no longer smooth. Sticky, translucent fluid was seeping out, flowing slowly in the cold air, spreading along the shell's curved surface, and then being stripped into extremely fine droplets, mixing with the swirling mist. The first tentacle fell 1.5 meters to the left of the vehicle. Penetration depth, 30 centimeters. The sound when it pierced the ground was not an impact but a high-pitched, grating screech, like a glass scraper. The grayish-white substance spread rapidly from the puncture point, and within a 2-meter radius, the frozen soil, fallen leaves, a snake's remains, and a half-weathered piece of granite all disintegrated into a pile of powder in the same instant. 0.8 of a second after the first tentacle pierced, over a dozen more simultaneously struck the ground around us. The gunner shouted a single word through the internal communication system: "Target." His voice was half drowned out by the roar of the engines and the resonance within the sealed cabin. The TOW missile launcher was powered up, the missile's seeker head searching for the thermal signature in front of it. The target's outline was too large. Any position could be hit, but no position seemed vulnerable. I locked the main control knob of the jamming module into the transmission position and slammed my fist against the safety release cover beside the full band block key. The communication specialist had already initiated electronic support measures, switching the remaining reconnaissance receiver to a passive, omnidirectional search mode, trying to locate any radiation source from the target in the electromagnetic hell we had created. The receiver locked onto a single frequency after 3 seconds. 9 gigahertz, pulse width of 0. 3 microseconds and a steady repetition rate. It was emitting radar waves. Even under the full power suppression of our jamming field, the signal strength was high enough to automatically kick the receiver's attenuator to the 4th setting. The probing pulses were repeatedly sweeping over the front hemisphere of our vehicle, the front and top of the turret, and the top armor. It wouldn't find me through the smoke. It was using a more precise method to lock onto us. The second wave of tentacles struck the vehicle simultaneously. The top armor of the turret received 6 hits, the front armor 4, and the left skirt plate 1. The impact sounds reverberated through the overpressure compartment as deep, muffled thuds, like being inside a bell and struck by iron hammers. Each hit triggered the material transformation we had seen before. Sections of the steel plate turned grayish-white, losing their ductility and strength, and began to flake off under continuous mechanical stress. The fragments, before falling, had already coalesced into foam-like aggregates, and the sound of their impact on the vehicle was soft, like wet plaster. The ballistic computer of Vehicle 3 transmitted a set of data to our fire control bus without any command. It was calculating the target's distance, speed, and lead. Vehicle 3 was automatically allocating target parameters. The driver's later testimony confirmed that the gunner was manually loading the main gun and calibrating the sight at the same time. The overheating warning light of the jamming module began to flash. The forced air cooling system was already running at full speed, but the transmitter power had been pushed to 3 times its design limit, and the power amplifier module's temperature was rising at a rate of 0.8 degrees per second. In less than 40 seconds, the overheat protection would force a shutdown. The communications specialist disabled the overheat protection circuit, bypassing the temperature trip relay with a fuse. The warning light switched from flashing to a steady red. The electromagnetic noise maintained full power output. Then the armor plates on the belly began to open. It was less than 30 meters directly above us. The entire bottom structure expanded outward from the center like a massive gate, the hexagonal shell plates being pushed open one by internal pistons, revealing the spiral-arranged internal structure. The structure glowed an eerie blue through the fog. Hundreds, if not thousands, of luminous bodies distributed along the spiral arms, each pulsating at a fixed frequency, synchronized with the 9 gigahertz probing pulses. The core layer, a substance we couldn't locate on the periodic table, it appeared in the camera's view as a material in a transitional state between molten and crystalline, flowing, yet maintaining a fixed spiral geometric structure. The edge of the entire internal cavity was lined with dense crystal clusters, growing inward toward the spiral center, visible to the naked eye. The gunner fired the moment the main gun stabilized. The first M829A1 fin-stabilized discarding sabot penetrator left the barrel at a speed of 1,570 meters per second, the depleted uranium core completing its full acceleration within the 120 millimeters gun tube. The muzzle shockwave collided with the fog wall ahead, cleaving a direct path to the target. The penetrator hit one of the crystal clusters at the edge of the spiral structure, causing an intense but silent flash. The light radiation was outside the visible spectrum, visible only as a brief, full white saturation on the thermal imaging. The core of the projectile passed through the crystal, but lost all kinetic energy during the second half of its penetration. The remnants were captured by an anomalous gravitational field or some other force, falling toward the spiral center and vanishing. The second main gunshot was fired 4 seconds after the first. This high-explosive anti-tank shell aimed at the connection point directly above the core, where the spiral arms met the outer shell. It exploded. The flames and shrapnel were completely released in that enclosed space, but we heard no explosion. No mechanical waves emanated from the core, only light. The shape of the flames in that space was abnormal. They were spreading outward, but their edges were not turbulent. The boundaries were clear, as if constrained by some invisible reference frame within a 3-meter radius of the blast center. The third shell was fired from Vehicle 3. It hit the same position. The connection point began to disintegrate from the inside out. This was a completely different material reaction from what we had seen before. The fragments, upon breaking away from the main body, did not fall in a parabolic arc. They drifted slowly, as if through a highly viscous liquid. Each fragment emitted its own eerie blue glow, then folded in on itself during its movement, shrinking in volume, and ultimately collapsing into points that could no longer be observed. A thunderous roar emerged from the depths of the core. This time we heard it. The frequency was incredibly low, so low that it resonated in our chests and stomachs, like the pitch of a splitting crust compressed into the infrasound range. The entire structure began to tilt backward, its head, the end with the rotating orifice, slowly lifting, while the aperture on its abdomen widened diagonally, disrupting the horizontal baseline it had maintained all along. The gunner shouted something, but in the din of the engines and the clatter of metal peeling, I only caught the last word. Directly below, its bottom aperture was now aligned with us. The pressure inside the collective protection system dropped to -1. 2 kilopascals, the sealed structure struggling under the differential pressure it was actively applying. Dust was being sucked into the air through any crevice in our boots. The liquefaction rate on the thermal imaging screen surged, and the left front road wheel of Vehicle 3 was already sinking, the torsion bars straining under a bending moment they weren't designed to withstand. It was sending a repeating sequence of numerical codes. The decoder returned a string of letters in standard ASCII, displayed at the bottom of the main screen, breathing synchronization complete. The combat data link to Vehicle 3 was restored in the same instant, automatically re-establishing the connection. Vehicle 3's gunner was manually inputting the final set of firing parameters. The shockwave hit as I was issuing the last firing command to Vehicle 3. The audio instruction was still in the buffer of the combat data link. Incomplete. The pressure peak recorded by the external microphones exceeded the upper limit of their range, the sensor diaphragms shattering in 0.003 seconds. Then all external microphones went dead. I was thrown from my seat as the commander. My helmet liner collided with the turret's inner wall, and if an accelerometer had been present, it would have recorded a momentary value exceeding 20 times the force of gravity. The duration of my loss of consciousness was impossible to estimate. When I regained consciousness, the fog was visibly dissipating, not being blown away, but settling. The gray-white aerosol fell uniformly to the ground, like a silent, reversed snowstorm. The first frame from the external cameras, once power was restored, showed the canopy layer gone. The terrain had changed. Within my field of vision, there was no longer any upright vegetation. The surface was covered with a uniform, fine layer of gray-white powder, about 4 to 6 centimeters thick, extending from the front of the vehicle to the horizon. The depression was about 300 meters to the north. Its estimated diameter exceeded the length of 2 football fields end to end. The edges were steep, the cross-section smooth, as if a massive hot knife had gouged out a piece of the crust. The depth was immeasurable. The bottom of the depression showed no visible light reflection, and the thermal imaging channel was a dead black. Vehicle 3 was parked about 40 meters from the rear of my vehicle. Its gun barrel still pointed in the direction of the target's last known position, with about a third of its external armor peeled off, but the vehicle itself was intact. The hatch was open. That object was nowhere in the sky, nowhere in the fog, and not in any quadrant that our sensors could detect. The outside air temperature was rising. The radiation readings slowly dropped from off the scale of the malfunctioning alarms to 4 times the normal background level. The infrasound had disappeared. The 9 gigahertz detection pulse was completely absent from the spectrum. I climbed out of the hatch. The ice-crystallized dust crunched under my boots like shattered ceramic. 2 survivors from Vehicle 3 sat beside the road wheels, Driver Silva and the communications specialist. Silva's pupils reacted sluggishly to light, and the communications specialist was repeatedly touching the dust on the ground. His movements rhythmic, 40 times per minute. The digital clock showed that 17 minutes had passed since the jamming module shut down. In my memory, that duration was a blur of shock, darkness, and then this. The vehicle's recording device memory cards were all readable, but the data for those 17 minutes was entirely occupied by the same format error. 12 days later, investigators classified the incident as a Soviet chemical weapons attack. On the tactical map of the Fulda Gap, a new white corridor marked as absolutely off-limits was added. The appendix of the investigation report contains the infrared imagery from the weather satellite on the night of the incident, showing that a low-temperature signal, matching the volume of the object, did not vanish upon impact. It remained stable for 1 hour and 17 minutes, 2,300 meters directly below the crash site, before continuing its horizontal movement along the original path, heading northwest by north at the exact same speed as before the event. The signal finally disappeared along the underwater topography line of the Greenland-Iceland United Kingdom Gap. The route had no end.